All right, we are going to get started. This is Brooke Rouse from the St. Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that everyone is doing as well as can be expected as things are reopening. We hosted, in partnership with the St. Lawrence County IDA and the Small Business Development Center, very early on in March. Dan joined us and was extremely helpful and has been a great resource throughout this, navigating the SBA programs. And so we're happy to have him back. I do want to remind everybody that you do have resource in the St. Lawrence County Chamber, the IDA, and the Small Business Development Center, all available for one-on-one counseling for you, especially with the SBDC, as well as just helping you to navigate whatever the situation is specific to you. So we will get started. This is being recorded and we will make it available as soon as possible. We know there are a lot of people who weren't able to join. And so for those of you also who work with clients who might want the information firsthand, you'll be able to forward that information on to them as well. So Dan Rickman is with us today. He is the Deputy District Director of the Small Business Administration, and we're looking forward to a great conversation with a lot of Q&A on the EIDL and the PPP program. And I'll remind everyone who's on the call, especially by computer, that you can type in your questions in the chat box and leave them open to everyone or to me if you feel more comfortable. And we will we'll hit the questions probably at the end, unless it's point on with what Dan's talking about in the moment. All right, Dan, take it away. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Brooke, and thanks for organizing this webinar with short notice. I'm glad we've got some good participation, and I appreciate everything you're doing to help spread the word for the assistance that's out there for businesses during this crisis. You mentioned, we did this, early on in March, and I just realized that it was 3 months today that New York was declared a disaster area by the federal government, and that's actually when the economic injury disaster loans initially launched. So it's been only 3 months, but wow, it's been 3 months, right? It's amazing how time is flying. But so I guess for the purposes of this conversation, I'm just going to do a quick overview of the major COVID-19 relief programs that SBA is involved in, focusing on some of the changes and enhancements that have come out. I think folks are generally aware that these programs were spun up very quickly, and they've evolved to a certain extent, both with clarifying guidance that has come out from SBA and the Treasury Department, but also with some significant changes from Congress over the last couple of months. So first, of course, we have the Paycheck Protection Program, which was launched on March 27th. And designed to provide immediate relief to business owners so that they can pay their employees and keep their employees on the payroll, initially for a period of 8 weeks, and recently the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act was passed a couple of weeks ago that extended the time you have to use the funds out to 24 weeks to make it a little bit more flexible for businesses. Originally, the Paycheck Protection Program, the initial rules required that 75% of the funds be spent on payroll. And that threshold was lowered to 60% by the PPP Flexibility Act a couple of weeks ago. And both of those provisions apply to all borrowers, all PPP applicants. You don't have to opt in to those changes. It is optional for any business, whether they got their money 2 months ago, or if they haven't even applied yet. You can benefit from the new enhancements to the PPP program. A couple other changes from the PPP Flexibility Act included an extension of the deferment period for any portion of your PPP loan that may end up not being eligible for forgiveness. The deferment on the principal and interest payments was extended to 6 months, or from 6 months to 10 months. And for new PPP loans, as of June 5th, the maturity, the term was extended to 5 years from the original 2, for all new PPP loans. Prior PPP loans, the 2-year term remains in place at the mutual agreement of you and your lender. You may request that the lender extend the maturity to 5 years if there's any loan balance. I think, as we go through the conversation today, it's the expectation is most businesses will be able to achieve 100% forgiveness. So that shouldn't be a problem for most companies. But we'll address some specific questions as we go through. The updated forms and guidance incorporating the Paycheck Protection, the PPP Flexibility Act, have been posted to our website. So there's an updated borrower application form, a lender form, as well as updated Paycheck Protection Program forgiveness forms that were launched this week. And that included 2 forms, including what we're calling an easy form. And for businesses that, for certain types of businesses, it's an expedited form that's fewer pages. If your business, for example, if you're a sole proprietor and have no employees, you can use that easy form because, the additional documentation for, the payroll expenses aren't required, right? For businesses that, for whom they haven't made any changes to their employment, right? They were able to maintain their full-time equivalent count, for example. They can use the easy form without the additional paperwork. A couple other scenarios that make sense when you kind of look at the form. If you don't have to take advantage of any of the safe harbors or any of these other, nuanced issues. You didn't reduce wages. These are all scenarios where you can use this easy form. But it is now an option, and it does incorporate the 2 new covered periods. With the Economic Injury Disaster Loan program, which, as I mentioned, launched prior to PPP, but was enhanced by Congress with the CARES Act on March 27th to include an advance or grant component to the EIDL program. The EIDL program is designed to cover a little bit more than the PPP program. The only portion of the EIDL loan that is forgivable is the advance, which is up to $10,000 per, at $1,000 per employee. If you're a sole proprietor, you're eligible for at least $1,000 if you have no employees. And the loan itself, the balance of the loan, can be used for, ordinary, working capital expenses of the business. We're talking, paying the bills, rent, utilities, accounts payable, inventory, those things you need to, pay to keep your business operational. We do get a lot of questions on, what else the funds can be used for. That's pretty much it. The funds aren't not intended. In fact, it's prohibited to use the EIDL loan funds to, pay off long-term debt or, acquire, assets for the business or improve the business or relocate the business or do anything other than really, pay your normal bills. Okay. The one exception to paying off debts is, if you have some short-term debts that you incurred as a result of the current crisis, and use that debt to pay your operating expenses that would otherwise have been eligible for the EIDL loan proceeds, you can use your EIDL loan to pay off those short-term debts. It is important to keep, records that the related expenses would otherwise have been, eligible. But that is something that you can do. That includes paying off loans to the owner. If you, the owner, loaned money to your business, to buy fuel, pay rent, whatever, that would otherwise have been eligible, you can pay that loan off to yourself. But that's pretty much the limit of any funds that can go back to an owner. It's only for those short-term debts for the purposes of keeping the business afloat during the current crisis. I think folks are kind of aware that a couple months ago that applications for the EIDL program were paused, and that was frankly due to the sheer volume of applications. I think we approached 6 million applications for the EIDL program, and the window did relaunch for agricultural businesses only to apply, and that was a function of Congress adding additional funds to the PPP program, and allowing agricultural businesses to apply for the EIDL program via legislation, I think about 6 weeks ago. And I'm happy to report that this week, SBA has kind of gotten a handle on the current volume of applications, and reopened the EIDL portal to all eligible companies as of this week. The advance is still a part of the program, so advances are still available. And we're kind of encouraging businesses, that either missed the window initially, to get their applications in now. There's still a limit to the funding that's available for the EIDL program. So it is important to get your application in. There's also still funding available for the PPP program. The current funding amount, I think we still have over $100 billion left. However, the application window is closing on June 30th. Now, June 30th is the last date that your bank can submit an approved PPP loan into our systems and receive an SBA loan authorization number. So really, the deadline for you, for any company that still wants a PPP loan but has not applied yet, is going to be more dependent on how quickly your bank can turn that loan around. It probably would not be reasonable to wait until June 30th to apply for a PPP loan at your bank and expect that your bank could get that loan in time. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons to get working on that right now if you haven't yet. So that's kind of the where we've been over the last few months, and some of the highlights of the changes to the PPP program. I think rather than me continuing to talk at you guys, probably best to start going through the questions. And I think, based on the questions, I think we'll probably answer a lot more of the stuff that, is relevant, for the folks on the line today.
Thanks, Dan. That was a good overview, and I encourage people to type questions. I also have some that I received ahead of time from people who were unable to make the call today. So do type in your questions down there in the chat box. So we may have covered this. What is the due date of the loan forgiveness application? And if you can talk a bit too about that process of forgiveness, that would be helpful.
Sure. So the forgiveness you have after the end of your covered period, you have up to 10 months to apply for forgiveness. Okay. Now all businesses now have up to a 24-week covered period. So you have up until 10 months after the end of your covered period to apply for forgiveness. So there's no hard deadline. Now, granted, I would strongly encourage you to apply for forgiveness as soon as you're able to, because you probably want to get that liability, which is that PPP loan, off your books as soon as possible, as does your bank for that matter. I'm sure that banks will be reaching out to their borrowers to encourage them to start applying for forgiveness once we start approaching the end of that 24-week period. I should point out that there's probably some companies that have already completed 8 weeks And if your company under the original 8-week covered period have already met the original requirements of, um, you know, or really even the current requirements of 60%, if you've met the requirements of spending the funds, at least 60% on payroll, 40% on other eligible expenses, and if you have met any of the various, FTE or rehiring requirements, you can apply for forgiveness right now. Okay, the application's available, and you send it to your bank. Your bank has quite a bit of time to process that application. They have up to 90 days to process the application, and I will share, there's still there's some additional guidance on the lender side, some of the procedures on how they can remit this documentation to SBA. We expect that to come out very shortly. So it's going to take a little bit of time for these forgiveness applications that are coming in now or very soon to process, but you can start working on it now. If you have not yet spent all of your PPP funds, or still have to do some rehiring, or something along those lines, you can certainly wait. Our interpretation, SBA's interpretation, our understanding is that you don't have to wait the full 24 weeks to apply for forgiveness if you are taking advantage of that 24-week covered period, because many businesses won't need the entire 24 weeks to use the rest of the funds, and as they're supposed to, and be able to document their specific hiring circumstances. And I say document their specific hiring circumstances because the Ppp Flexibility Act did add a new safe harbor for businesses that were unable to reach their pre-disaster employment as a direct result of government mandates. For example, could not open your doors, limited occupancy, these challenges that all businesses are facing right now. If you can document that is, you may use any documentation that supports that as a safe harbor for any reason why you may not have reached that pre-disaster employment. Okay, so that's available for all businesses. We expect some additional clarification to come out in the FAQ on that, not having to wait until 24 weeks to apply for forgiveness idea. So that should be coming out pretty shortly. But it makes sense when you think about it, right? If you've already met the terms, you've spent the money, there's no need to wait for 24 weeks, okay? That pretty well covers it, I think.
Okay, just a point of clarification, you mentioned you can submit your application. What is that application? Just to clarify, is that through the individual bank? I know in some of the banks created their own kind of portals for the application originally, and have those. And for those on the line, if you are interested in still applying for the PPP or have clients who are, most of the banks locally are no longer doing the PPP loans, but we do have contact with a few who are. So feel free to get in touch with us, or I know the folks at the IDA are really helping connect people with the banks that are doing that. So just wanted to make that point. But back to the application for forgiveness. What is that? Where is that?
So copies of the form are available on our website at sba.gov/PPP. And indeed, like copies of all the forms and the rules and FAQs, and there's a lot of information on that page, are available on sba.gov/PPP. Some banks, I expect, will have an online version of that form, and they're probably working on it right now. You do go back to your original bank that you applied for. So if you are approaching forgiveness time, then it's probably worth reaching out to the bank to figure out what their preferred process is, because it is going to be up to the bank, if they're going to accept the paper forms or ask you to do an online version. that is, generally the process. But you can get a handle on what, the type of information and the calculations. Those are all going to be the same for everybody, okay? And you can get that by reviewing the forgiveness applications from our website.
Great, thank you. And you would advise that people go to their bank first to see if they already have an application, or should they fill this one out online? This is for forgiveness.
Maybe take a look at, if you're there, you spent all the money, it's time to look at forgiveness. Take a look at the form. You probably don't have to fill it out yet, and just to know what to expect, you then should reach out to your bank and ask them what their preferred method of submitting the application is going to be.
Great, thank you. And just someone on the line here noted that KeyBank is accepting PPP applications if anybody's interested. Okay, just a follow up on, let me see here. A follow up on the PPP and the EIDL and the eligibility for using the expenses. How do those two interact? There's been a lot of conversation with folks that I've talked about. Well, if I get the PPP, I can't get the EIDL, or if I use it for that, I can't use it for that. They're at different banks with different accounts. How am I organizing that? How does that actually hash out? I'll leave it at that.
Great question. So, a couple of things. You certainly you may benefit from both programs. So you can have both a PPP loan and an economic injury disaster loan. There's a general, prohibition against duplicating the purpose of an SBA loan. Okay. So, what that means, if you have a PPP loan that you're going to use for payroll over a certain period of time, that you should not be using an economic injury disaster loan for the same purpose at the same time. Okay. So, bookkeeping is important, right? And I think if you're simply aware of that as a borrower, then you should be able to, kind of keep track of that. You pointed out having the funds in different accounts as an effective method of, keeping track of that. If you never commingle the funds, then and it's easier to kind of keep track of where the money's going. Okay. But generally, once the PPP funds have been exhausted, as they are more limited in nature, you may only use the PPP funds for payroll, rent, interest on mortgage obligations, and utilities. Okay. Whereas the economic injury disaster loan funds can be used for any legitimate working capital expense of the business. So it's much broader. And it's generally going to be a larger amount of funds for most businesses, because it is designed to cover all of those operating expenses over some period of time. Because to assist with the fact that many businesses just don't have the revenues right now to pay their overhead, right? And that's what the EIDL funds are there to do. Now, there are a couple of other things to be aware of. One is if you opted into an advance on your economic injury disaster loan, that portion is automatically forgiven. Okay, so it can be considered a grant. Any EIDL advance funds that you receive that are ultimately forgiven, that does reduce the amount of forgiveness you're eligible for on the PPP loan. Okay, the idea behind it being that frankly, they are coming from the same source of funds. Okay, the CARES Act, and the way the interaction works is when you apply for forgiveness on your PPP loan, and the total forgiveness amount is computed. Okay, say for example you got $100,000, and you also received a $10,000 advance because you had 10 employees. Okay, and say for example you're eligible for 100% forgiveness on your PPP loan because you had eligible expenses equivalent to 100% of the PPP loan amount. the amount that would be remitted to the bank to literally pay off your PPP loan, because that's how the forgiveness process works, would be reduced by $10,000 in this scenario, right? So in that scenario, you would have a $10,000 balance remaining on your PPP loan, okay? At that point, you would then have the option of, if you had the cash, either immediately paying it off, that balance with no prepayment penalty, or certainly allowing that remaining balance to amortize over the remainder of your PPP term, right? Either the 2 or 5 years, depending on what your maturity date is for your PPP loan. So that is the extent of that interaction. The advance is not part of your loan principal for your economic injury disaster loan. Okay. So you don't have to worry about it with respect to your EIDL loan. You just have to be aware of any amount you may receive would reduce your forgiveness on the PPP program. Okay. That generally is going to be to your advantage, because the EIDL funds, again, are more flexible. So you can do more with those funds than you can with the PPP funds, but it is something to keep in mind. You can certainly plan for that expense, that loan, if you do not want to carry a balance at the end of the PPP period. It's simply a matter of kind of reserving funds and planning that cash flow so you can pay off the balance at the end of it.
Do people need to track the expenses that they use the advance for?
So that's a great question. I don't have a great answer. Generally speaking, it is technically an advance on the EIDL loan. So technically it should be used for similar types of working capital purposes. Okay. But you don't, say for example, you don't even, you don't accept an EIDL loan, right? It's automatically forgiven. So I can say that, the CARES Act did specify that the advance was for those similar types of working capital purposes. So, the only thing I can say is that, you should use it for those similar types of working capital purposes.
Okay. And similarly, the additional now 40% of the PPP loan that can be used somewhat for working capital, as is the EIDL, that can't be duplicated. Those need to be tracked. So it's different. If rent and mortgage and utilities are coming out of PPP, then EIDL needs to focus on ABC instead of XYZ.
Yeah, that's fair and accurate. Again, it should be a little more straightforward if you're keeping them in separate accounts and paying those bills out of those separate accounts, right? And then once the PPP funds are exhausted, you can revert to using the EIDL funds to pay those expenses. But you definitely want to avoid duplicating the payments. I don't know, paying rent out of one account one month and the other out of the second month, and like going back and forth. That would create some confusion, right? So I think it would be, wise to just, be consistent with that. It is important to keep records of, your use of the proceeds of that loan. If for whatever, SBA or had to look at that loan for some reason. That isn't to say, I'll just be honest, like there's no way we're going to look at 6 million loans, right? That's just never going to happen. But loans, part of the economic injury disaster loan is that you must, keep those records. It's like a normal business loan in that respect. So you should treat it as such. I think that's the general guidance.
Very good. Thank you. And again, just a reminder to people, you can type your questions into the chat box. You can click for everyone to see, or you can click for me to see or Dan to see if you feel more comfortable with that. We won't call out your name unless you want us to. So please don't be shy about asking questions. There's no question too silly or too small. And I don't know how many of the people on the line here are new to these programs. Several of us have been working with them day to day for the last 3 months. So we're quite versed in just paying attention to the updates. But if you have questions about the original program and use and all of that, don't hesitate to ask those questions. Again, Dan gave a nice overview in the beginning, but really was more focused on the updates. And we do like to take the time. Last time we had a solid half hour or more of Q&A. So that's, you've got Dan and he's got the answers. It's easier than reading through websites and forms all day. So now's your chance. So we do have a few more. I'll keep going, and please just continue to ask your questions, people. All right, so in one of the SBA releases, it stated that an owner of an entity cannot use salaries paid to the owner in excess of 2019 salary in calculating the forgiveness for PPP. Is that still the rule? And that's in the chat if it's easier to read.
Yes, that is accurate. That was consistent. The guidance did limit originally owner or owner employees. Their application could not exceed that 8-week average of their compensation for 2019. Or if you were a sole proprietor, it could not exceed the 8 weeks of your net earnings. So it is going to be related to that initial loan application you did and how you calculated your loan amounts, and that still applies. The extension of the 24-week covered period did extend the ability for owners to pay themselves for up to 10 weeks. If you think back, originally, the loan calculation is 10 weeks or 2.5 months of payroll. And if a business is using the 24-week covered period, they may pay themselves that extra 2 weeks essentially. I would suggest you review the forgiveness application because it does kind of specify very clearly that that's the case for owner employees or owners/owner employees. Okay, whether you're paying yourself as an employee or as a sole proprietor. So that's a great question. And then of course the $100,000 limit is still in place, generally annualized for any employee, but it was extended to include the 10 weeks.
Great. And again, if any of these questions need follow-up, please continue to type those in the chat. Another question, is it still the case that the grant portion of EIDL received reduces forgiveness on PPP by that dollar amount? And this person joined a little bit late, so she may have missed that, but if you want to just briefly reiterate that.
Yes, that is still the case. And it's just something you have to plan for from a cash flow perspective as you're kind of working that out. And, I'm sure our partners at the Small Business Development Center, I don't know if Dale is on the line or not, but out of Canton, would be very, very happy to help you with managing that cash flow and just just generally, helping you manage your cash flow. So you're not duplicating the use of funds and, keeping good bookkeeping practices for the purposes, just generally, but also for the purposes of these programs. You can reach them at nyssbdc.org.
Make an appointment online. And for those who don't know, the SBDC folks from SUNY Canton have been working also around the clock throughout this. I can't remember their percentage increase, but it's been crazy. They've also added several new employees that I think are getting onboarded. Some are on today, I think. And so they'll have more resource. Thank you to some SBA funding. And so certainly utilize them whenever you're scratching your head or banging it against the wall. Call the SBDC and they've got more resources. Dan just put that link in. Are there 2 S's in the middle or one?
Yep, there's
2. Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's me, but
yeah. So another question, if using the easy form, do the calculations for the worksheets still need to be completed for documentation, for record keeping?
So if you're using the easy form, you are not required to fill out the worksheets. You are required to keep the documentation that supports your assertions, though, because part of it you are testing that you meet all those requirements. So you should have corresponding documentation. Okay. Similarly, with the long form, maybe that's what we're going to start calling it. You are required to fill out the worksheets. You're not required to submit them, though. So it is an additional layer. We have to keep that documentation on hand along with the supporting documentation for the payroll or any of the other expenses. But you're not required to keep the worksheets for the easy form because they're not part of the easy form.
Thank you. And again, please follow up with any questions. Just looking at the questions I received ahead of time. And again, I see some nonprofits are on. If there are specific questions to that, feel free to ask. We've got several sole proprietors on. Feel free to ask questions that might relate to you. Sometimes you think it's specific to you, but it does relate to others on the call. So again, now's the time. And if you want to chat it to me privately, I can relay it anonymously as I have been. Let me just look at these other questions. Someone applied for an EIDL. Is it okay that I call it an EIDL, or is it really EI? Okay, I say that and then like an EIDL, EIDL, and got the loan but not the advance. Is that possible? What would the reason be to that, or did they just miss it on their bank account?
That's actually one example. They may have simply missed the direct deposit. The advance posts without notification once the the identity and the of the business has been confirmed. It's possible that someone did not check the box to receive the advance, which that certainly happens. They are related, though. So I guess if they received the loan and did not receive an advance, then and they also received the PPP loan and are eligible for forgiveness. Probably doesn't make sense to go after the advance at this point, because you've already received all the funds and it would kind of muddy the waters. If you applied for the EIDL, did not apply for the PPP, and did not receive the advance, I would contact our customer service department and ask why, if it's possible to correct whatever circumstances resulted in you not getting the advance. Does that make sense? If you have both programs, then it's not really necessary to go get the advance now, because you've already received the benefit, right? Both the funding and the forgiveness, it's all going to wash out. If for whatever reason, for example, I would actually point out if you're an entity that's eligible for EIDL but not for PPP, I would contact customer service about getting that advance rectified so you can benefit from that part of the CARES Act. It's not really possible for me to speculate beyond that. I can say if you're not able to get anywhere with our customer service folks and they're not able to provide any answers, at that point, it'd probably be a good idea to reach out to our office to see if we can help dig a little bit deeper. But generally, it's best to kind of contact customer service first because we can't see anything, right? They can see everything or most things with respect to your economic injury disaster loan application and provide a lot more immediate insight, and that often can answer your question. If we need to troubleshoot additional issues, then we can see if our office can escalate to figure out where something might be stuck, because there's 6 million applications, so every once in a while something will get we'll have to help troubleshoot a little bit. So you can reach us at 315-471-9393. That's our office, our main number. You don't have to ask for me. It's actually best if you just, leave contact information and a description of what you need some help with, and somebody on our team will get back to you as soon as they can. So I just put that in the chat too. So there's that.
Great. Along those lines of just kind of questions for people who already applied for the EIDL, if you're denied, is that it? Or can you resubmit, or should you contact customer service? What's the recommendation there?
Yeah, so if you're declined, okay, you should receive a letter that specifies the specific reason for the decline, and the process for appealing. And when you appeal, you should provide, any relevant information that might overcome, the decline reason, the deficiency in your application. That is the process. Okay. There's any of a number of reasons. Sometimes we can't verify the information of the borrower. Sometimes credit is an issue. This is a loan, so credit is part of the loan. And, and if that's one of the reasons that is specified is unsatisfactory credit history or something to that effect, you need to take a look at your Experian credit report, because that's what ODA, Office of Disaster Assistance at SBA, uses for the EIDL program. Review any derogatory information, okay, and provide an explanation for any of that derogatory information, okay. That is the process for appealing. It's providing more information. Simply disagreeing with a decision is not an appeal, because you haven't provided new information. You have to provide new information or additional clarifying information to have any chance of a successful appeal. I think this is another area where, certainly the SBDC can help, maybe review your credit report if credit is an issue, or things along those lines. If it's tough to even tell what the decline reason really is, that might be another, reason to give our office a call to see if we can get a little bit more information. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lag, with some of that, particularly like if they can't verify your information, that could be any of a number of things. Either the tax ID numbers don't match up, bank account information doesn't match up, something in the application doesn't match, public records, IRS rules, it's or IRS data. I mean, there's a whole slew of reasons that, may make an application difficult to verify. So if you get one of those where, it just, you can't parse out what the reason really is, that's another reason to reach out to our office to see if we can't get a little bit more clarity on exactly what you need to submit to rectify your application. In this one, in this scenario you specify, they were declined and resubmitted and was or I guess appealed, right? You don't resubmit the loan, you appeal, and was denied again. I mean, you can certainly appeal again if you have additional information to provide, because when the reconsideration department tells you why they can't reconsider your application, it should address the information you put in the appeal itself, right? And that's not good enough, or you didn't answer this, or something to that effect. So you can provide additional information. It's not making a new application though. So I just want to, make that clear. You make one application, right? And you're able to, kind of continue to provide additional information if there's new information. I hope that makes sense.
Yep, that's helpful. Thank you. Couple more questions. Can hazard pay be forgiven? If yes, what are the parameters?
So if you're talking about paying your employees, more money than, you did last year, and say, for example, those wages were in the form of a, additional rate of pay such as hazard or something along those lines, then, absolutely, there's, it's your money to pay your employees as you will. The only limitations we have are going to be with the owners, as we've talked about, and the annualized limit of $100,000 per employee. Otherwise, you pay your employees however you want.
Okay, thank you. Oh, just a request for clarification. For the EIDL, there's no company size limit? Can it be more than 500 employees?
No, there is a limit. It's similar to the limits on the PPP program. Those were increased by the CARES Act to 500 employees, or the relevant existing SBA size standard for your company and your industry. There are some companies, particularly some manufacturers, where the size standard is higher than 500 employees. If your company, say it's a 750 employee size standard, then you're eligible to apply. Okay, you're not going to get punished because there's an enhancement of 500 employees for those businesses that wouldn't otherwise be considered small by SBA. Okay, there's also no limit to the nonprofits for EIDL. The nonprofit organizations have always been eligible for the EIDL program, and the size standards do not apply to those nonprofits. For the EIDL program only.
So for nonprofits, and this was the question, from a nonprofit, so there's no size limit at all?
No, there's no size limitation to nonprofits.
Okay. Just scrolling back here. Another question, if the PPP funds forgiveness has been reached after the 8-week period, but before 24 weeks, say 10 weeks, is it possible to complete the loan forgiveness at that point, or will we need to wait the full 24 weeks? I think you talked about that a little bit, but maybe just clarify.
Yeah, I'll reiterate. So it's a great question, because if you kind of look at the language of the application form, it's a little unclear if you must wait until the end of the 24 weeks. And we're being informed that that's not the case, that it's when you've otherwise reached the requirements. Waiting 24 weeks is not one of the requirements. It's spending the funds as they're supposed to and reading any hiring requirements, and then you have up to 24 weeks to do so. Okay, so it's up to is probably the best way to describe it, and we expect that we're being told that it's that clarification on that should come out via the FAQ, and an update to our FAQ on our website from Treasury anytime now. So, because again, it doesn't really make sense, right? If you've met the requirements, there's no need to wait for 24 weeks, right? So that's our understanding as of right now.
And then the bank still has 90 days to submit for that forgiveness. So
I think it's actually 60 days. The bank has 60 days to process, and then we have 90 days, or vice versa. I'm getting my time periods mixed up.
Either way, it's not going to happen.
It's plenty of time.
It's not going to happen in 2 weeks.
No.
So if you have already reached that, or if you're coming close to it, the recommendation is to reconnect with your bank, see how they want you to pursue that application. If the bank has one of their own, or if they want you to use what the SBA has provided to get that ball rolling with documentation and all of that. And then the bank will do its thing, SBA will do its thing, and everything will be wonderful, right?
Perfectly posed there.
All right. Another question on time frame with PPP. What time frame will be used for FTEs for the PPP? We are seasonal with lower staffing regularly during the summer. We should be back up to normal staffing by the fall.
So it's based on you have several options. Going to be related to how you calculate it if you use a seasonal calculation for your PPP application. So I hate to punt, but I would say take a look at the forgiveness application, and it specifies the periods that you may use at your election, okay, for your FTE calculation. So you may find that one or the other periods that you may use are more favorable. So you can take a look at which works to your advantage. And then keeping in mind, of course, that there's the new, if you cannot reach your pre-disaster FTE level due to the government mandates, that's another reason why, that's another safe harbor for the business. Okay, if you are unable to meet that pre-disaster FTE count, you can rely on that if that applies to your business. Frankly, there are some businesses that were never shut down, right? And while they may have been eligible for a PPP program, it would be tough for them to make the assertion that the government mandate required them to shut, that they couldn't meet the FTE requirements because they were open and fully staffed the entire time, right? So it is important to have records. Okay, so it's not a, it is still important to document that your business is one of the ones that was affected by any of these, government mandates. Okay.
Thank you. And again, for those who have asked these questions, if you have any follow-up for clarification, don't hesitate to add that in there. I think I got everything. A reminder that SBA.gov has a lot of information on these. Dan, there's something you were talking about in the beginning and then kind of throughout as far as eligible expenses. Again, I asked again before, but that's something that keeps coming up with.
Mm-hmm.
You clarified they have to be separate. They can't kind of double dip the funds. But as you were talking about eligibility within the EIDL, is that somewhere, I'm just scrolling your site, is that list of what's eligible, like you said, short-term debt?
So
Yes.
there's some general information, and there's like a whole list. There's we have a standard operating procedure that says here are the things you can't do. When you get an EIDL loan in your loan terms and conditions, it also kind of highlights that it's for that ordinary and recurring working capital expenses of the business. I think the takeaway for the EIDL funds is, what you cannot spend the money on. It's not what you can spend the money on. It's the specific things, characters of things that are ineligible. And that includes acquiring assets for the business, improving the business, right? Relocating the business, paying off long-term debts, okay? Or paying or otherwise, frankly, enriching owners of the business, okay? These are all things that would be inappropriate for the EIDL funds. The only thing you could pay an owner, for example, if they're an employee, is what you normally would pay the owner for the services they're performing for the business, right? As an employee, and when you think about it, these things all kind of make sense, right? It should be limited to your kind of normal accounts payable or things that you incur through the normal operations of your business, right? Replenishing inventory, things of that nature. So I know it's not a great question, but it's like it's better to think in terms of the types of things. Otherwise, we get in kind of, well, what about this? What about this? If you're not sure what that means, like an ordinary working capital expense, I would say, kind of reach out to, certainly the SBDC, even our office, so you have a better understanding of what that might be. Some of the questions we get, well, can I prepay a loan, right? And pay a loan down in advance? I'm like, that's probably not inappropriate. That's probably not appropriate, because would you ordinarily be able to do that? Is that an ordinary and recurring expense? No, it's not. I would argue that if you have the ability to use all of your EIDL funds that should be for working capital, and I don't know, pay off a credit card with them, which you're not supposed to do, then, and not be worried about your operating expenses after using up all of the idle funds, then did you need the idle funds? Frankly, I know that it sounds a little bit harsh, but it's intended for you to keep your doors open, right? Not necessarily improve your financial position, make up for lost profits. It's to pay the bills. So that, if you keep that in mind, then you're probably not going to be in any kind of conflict with the terms and conditions of the loan. And if you do get an idle loan, you should carefully read the terms and conditions of that idle loan. It is a business loan, okay? So a lot of the language that is common to business loans are going to be in there, and that does put obligations on you as the employer, okay? You as the business owner, right? On fulfilling that contract, okay? So just something to keep in mind. We can help explain some of this stuff to you, but I think that's the general safe guidance I can give.
Okay. And you touched on a couple of things that brought up some of the questions I've been getting, especially for the retail sector, for example, and restaurants may be experiencing this as well, that normal revenue has not been coming in. And so obligations to inventory, for example, had to be made. And so if credit cards were used, for example, to pay for that inventory, but
so that's another great question, right? So you have to be careful, is all I can tell you with that, because it might be the case that you're not just purchasing inventory with that credit card, right? Like that you are doing things that maybe wouldn't be eligible for the EIDL fund. So I can't tell anybody, yeah, sure, pay off your credit card, right? The documentation burden is on you to pay those funds as they were supposed to. You could certainly make the payments on that credit card with the economic injury disaster loan funds, okay? And that would certainly preserve your cash so that you can, pay the inventory moving forward. I would just be cautious when it comes to refinancing debt, right? You just have to be careful that you can document it appropriately. So you may have to rely on your, accounting advisors, or ask for some help from the SBDC.
Okay, thank you. And I had another question with inventory being an asset or not.
Yeah, it's fixed assets. I should specify it's acquiring fixed assets.
Okay.
So inventory. Okay, there's always a qualification to that, right? If you normally buy 30 days worth of inventory, right? Well, you should continue to buy 30 days worth of inventory. Having these idle funds and purchasing a year's worth of inventory because you found a deal on the internet or something, that would not be ordinary, right? You wouldn't normally do that. So it would not be appropriate to use the idle funds to do that, okay? Just as a scenario, because somebody has asked me that question. You use the funds like you normally would and how you would normally operate your business. Try not to treat the idle loan as a windfall to do other things outside of the scope of what the funds are intended to achieve.
All right, thank you. Any last questions? We did put in the chat box, so for those who haven't been typing in there, but if you open that chat box, I put the link to the SBA.gov page that has links to each of the programs we've talked about here. There's one other there, the SBA relief program, if you already have an SBA loan. Oh, that reminds me, one other question with the idle loan. If you get, and for those who have received it, it's a scale. You don't have to, if you're offered 200,000, you don't have to take that all. You can take 10,000 if you want, or none of it. Anything over 25,000 has to be secured. Is that correct?
Yeah, so over 25,000, kind of a blanket, lien on business personal property, like your business assets, would be required. That's not real estate. Okay, real estate is not part of like your business personal property. It's real estate, and so that is something to keep in mind. If there's existing lien, SBA's lien is subordinate to that. It does put some additional requirements though for the disposition of those assets, but it's in the terms and conditions for your loan. I should note that it is not up to 200,000. Personal guarantees are not required. So the owner is not required to be a guarantor of the loan. They do have to sign the note, right? And they are responsible for executing the terms and conditions for so long as they are a part of the business. But you're not guaranteeing the loan on behalf of your business, okay? And that's for loans up to 200,000. So just some stuff to keep in mind.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. We really appreciate it here from the St. Lawrence County Chamber and our partners in this. We have many, but especially the St. Lawrence County IDA and the Small Business Development Center. We've been working hand in hand to try to reach as many businesses as possible. And I see a lot of other providers on the line today who have been doing the same across the county and some across the region. So we appreciate your time today and answering a lot of questions and providing those updates. And as I said to folks on the line, I will clean up this recording just a little bit, not too much, and make it available as a link to share to others. And if you do have additional questions or clients or businesses that you know who have not yet taken advantage of these programs, now is the time. EIDL is open right now. We don't know how long that will be for. And as Dan said, the PPP closes June 30th, which means that you need to get your application into the bank probably early next week to give them the time to process that. So my line of the week this week has been, if you're talking to a business and you say, how's it going? Make sure your next question is, were you able to receive any of the federal relief funds? And if not, connect them with one of the local resources or with the SBA page. We are here to help people walk through this. Certainly accountants have been in the thick of this as well and very helpful. Again, now is the time really in the next few days even to take advantage of these opportunities before they're gone. So again, thank you. Thank you to all of our partners and businesses out in St. Lawrence County who joined us today to learn and help others. And I hope all of you have a lovely weekend. Be sure to continue to wear your masks and keep 6 feet of distance when you're out. But get out and enjoy and spend money in the local economy. Thanks again. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Brooke. Bye.